In 2017, Port Carling Boats advertised this boat for sale. It's a 1915 Gidley. According to the Gidley catalog, it is a square stern power fishing boat, 16 feet long, a beam of about 4 feet. And I purchased it in July of 2018, took delivery of it in August of 2018. So if you look elsewhere on YouTube and you see that boat advertised in Port Carling Boats, or if you have a look at a couple of the videos that I already have up on YouTube, it's all the same boat. When I had a look at the boat, I realized immediately this thing was essentially a time capsule. So the object of the exercise in the renovation and the restoration of this boat was to try and keep it as close and as accurate as I could to the way it originally would have been in 1915. You'll notice that it's white as opposed to the duck egg green. The duck egg green was added somewhere after the boat was built. Gidley in their catalog say that when their boats leave their factory, they have 3 coats of the best English white lead. So white is period correct for the boat. And as well, when I started looking at the boat, it was evident that in fact it had at one time been white. If you look at the boat, there's a few things left to do, and somebody might be quick off the mark and look at that tiller and say, hey, Buddy's got the ropes hooked up backwards. Yeah, Buddy has the ropes hooked up backwards, but don't worry about it. We'll get that squared away before we actually throw this thing in the water. But here it is. It's the same boat that Robert Atfield was talking about in 2017. What I've tried to do is I've tried to do effectively as little as possible to it. It was in such good shape when I got it. And so I've tried to do as little to it as possible. The object of the exercise was to make it seaworthy. It was also to prevent any further deterioration, so to protect it as much as I could. And where there was any work required, that work would be performed using original materials, tools, and techniques as closely as I possibly could. You will not find a Robertson or a Phillips head screw in this thing. There are only a couple of hexagonal bolts in it, and that's the way it was found. Everything else is square head bolts. There's some square nails, there's some copper nails in it, and all of the screws are slotted screws. That's what they had back in the day. When we look at up in the bow here, you'll see a couple of things. Now, first of all, the serial number for the boat, I'm not sure if I mentioned, is 1515, which would suggest that it was the 15th boat that Gidley built in 1915. When you have a look at both the front and the rear seats, underneath the seats is written in pencil 1515. So those are original to the boat. That fuel tank is galvanized material, and it was made before the invention of the electric soldering iron, and a guy named Pat built it. And Pat, wherever you are, you did an excellent job. That tank is 104 years old. I took it out, I cleaned it, and when I pressure tested it, it didn't leak. So it was in good shape. I know that a guy named Pat built it because he signed his name to the side of it. When we look back this way, if you want to have a look at that Adams motor, the motor itself has no serial number on it. It has a Ford Model T spark plug, a period correct ignition lead, and going back behind, you'll see underneath the seat is a wooden box that was an as found. That's how it was when I got it. It looks like it might have been MacGyvered somewhere along the way, but that's how I found it. In that box is a Ford Model T Trembler ignition coil and a 6-volt battery. The boat has a muffler you can see underneath the seat, and that muffler, when I pulled it out to clean it up, on the underside of it written in grease pencil were the letters MXH and 350. I can only presume that MXH identified the part. 350 was $3.50. That's what it cost in 1915. The oars, original to the boat, those are Muskoka spoon oars, and I've been told that they are collector's items in their own right. They have new oar stops on them. Obviously the leather from The stops 104 years old were not suitable for reinstallation, so those are new. The floorboards are new, and it was virtually impossible to determine what the original floorboards would look like. They're back at the back of the shop. There is one you can see leaning up against the wall, the one that comes from the forward area, but it was a pretty bodged job. It was not original to the boat. Somebody manufactured that, and the quality of the workmanship is not sufficient for it to remain in the boat. As we come around as well, you'll see there's a wicker basket in there, which is removable. But in that basket is all the equipment that is required these days by law. So there's a fire extinguisher in there, there's a safety kit. As well, what I've done is I've put together a period correct set of tools, so I can repair or replace just about anything on this boat just with the tools that are in that wicker basket. The boat, as near as I could tell, well, first of all, with regard to the boat was purchased from Gidley by a guy named James Alonzo Spear. He was an American, and he bought the boat for use at his cottage in Sparrow Lake, Ontario. And it remained at Sparrow Lake for about 90 years. And the boat was sold on in 2004. It went through two hands rather quickly and ended up in a barn in Wybridge, Ontario. And that's where I found it in July of 2018. So depends on how you want to look at it. I could say that most correctly, I'm the fourth owner of this boat. But owners 2 and 3 did not that much to it. There was a little bit of work performed, but not much. But the boat, for all intents and purposes, is the way it was when Mr. Spear owned it back in the day. The only thing the boat was missing, and that I couldn't find any trace of, was a name. And I kind of thought, you know something, this boat has enough character, it needs a name. So it got a name. I had a choice of 4 that I'd been working on. Excuse the poor camera work. But a choice of 4. And then there's the name. And by the way, I really suck as a sign painter. So I hand lettered that, actually. Willis was my father. In this, first of all, he would have been really interested in this project. I think Willis is a very fitting name for this boat. And I used a lot of Willis's tools. And as well, there were a couple of pieces of wood that came from Willis's shop. And there were a couple of times where I was stuck for hardware. I needed a square nut. I needed a piece of hardware, period correct hardware of a particular kind. And as I went back through the stash of stuff that I hauled out of his house after when we closed it up, lo and behold, I found everything I needed. And so the boat bears the name Willis, which I think is, I took license as far as that's concerned. I mean, it didn't have the name Willis originally, but it's got it now. And I think that's terribly appropriate. The red plug to the side of it, this boat will now be riding on a trailer. It's going to be used quite a bit, hopefully, but it's going to be riding on a trailer. And so putting it into the water and getting it out again, there's a possibility it could inhale water if I haven't got a plug. So there's a cork plug that I've manufactured, and it's just there for launching the boat. And like that. So there you have it. A 1915 Gidley. And as I said at the outset, this is the same Gidley that Robert Atfield advertised on port carling boats.